Hey, folks. I know you could be listening to one of a million different podcasts right now, and I am super grateful you picked this one. Welcome to The Human Show. I'm your host, Trish, a holistic life coach and a mom navigating this complex world of human emotions. Here, we will share stories, insights, research, and information to help you step into the most true version of yourself so you can be a happy human. Now let's get into it. Hey, folks, thanks for being here. Today, we are talking about self-care and specifically talking about food as it relates to self-care. And I'm super excited to have an expert on food who's also a lovely human and was generous enough to hang out with me today to chat about this. So, Beth Chiodo, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Trish. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited
Yeah,
to be here.
awesome. So let's start out by let's learn a little bit about you. What would you like listeners to know about you, whether it's professionally, personally?
Yeah, probably two things. So I'm a registered dietitian. I'm a certified health and wellness coach. Basically means that I've devoted my life to helping people to be healthier, myself included. Um, I'm an education junkie, so I never get tired of doing certifications and I got my master's and all the things. It's good for my field because field of nutrition is always changing and you got to stay on top of all the changes. It's always new things to learn. Um, I know, we're going to talk about, like you said, nutrition and mood and self care. And I do just have to say that, and Trish, but my husband passed away unexpectedly November of this past year. So it's been almost 8 months. It was from a heart attack. And I think a lot of this discussion around food and mood and wellness has really resonated with me because I've been really working to practice what I'm preaching. And we'll kind of talk more about that as we move forward.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that because it's a big thing to share, and I appreciate you bringing it and being vulnerable. So thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's been a big piece of my self care, been surrounding that. And, I'm really feeling what we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, then let's get into, like you said, foods and moods. So, let's do the big, or I guess a pretty general question would be in your experience, what role does nutrition play in mental health, emotional well-being, things that are not more than just the physical effects and benefits?
Yeah, it's really such a good point to bring up. I think a lot of people think about nutrition and they think about, weight loss. How much weight am I going to lose? They'll be like, oh, it's a dietitian. You must just help people lose weight, but food is responsible for so much more than the number on the scale, or your physical body. Food plays a huge role in mood and well being and anxiety and depression. Um, I think the piece that we are learning so much more about now is the microbiome. We hear about the microbiome everywhere, and the microbiome is really referring to all the different bacteria that are contained in our colon specifically. And we know now that the microbiome is kind of what governs the health of our body, whether it be physical health, mental health, and we can directly shift our microbiome by the foods that we eat. So food really plays into really almost directly what our mental health is like. Um, at the same time, our blood sugar or hormone levels, those also directly impact our mood, our well-being, feelings of depression, anxiety, and we can really directly manipulate those by the foods we eat, how we eat, when we eat. So I think there's a pretty direct correlation there.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, sort of this idea that people have when they think about a nutritionist or a dietitian. And I used to be one of those people that I just thought they help you lose weight. And
Totally.
I had thought about it. Um, and just for everybody listening, I used to have sessions with Beth. I had nutrition counseling with Beth. That's how we met. And it was wonderful. And she helped me so much. And I will admit that before I started, I was like, I, I wasn't sure what to expect. I figured I would just try it because I hadn't. And fortunately, at the time, my insurance covered it. So that's another tip. Find out if your insurance covers nutrition counseling, just do it. I think it's worth it. So I remember going to my first session with you and I was nervous and I was thinking, okay, she's going to ask me what I eat in a day. And then I'm going to tell her, and she's probably going to be completely appalled and tell me, stop eating this, don't eat this, stop drinking beer, and you can't eat this, and you can't eat this. And so I expected I was going to come in and you were just going to tell me all these things I have to cut, 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 cut.
I love it. This is confession.
Right.
Beth.
And it was, and it was completely not that at all. It was a completely different experience. And you were so supportive. And like you said, you're a health and wellness coach. And it really felt like more of a coaching session, not
Yeah.
this clinical appointment that I sort of had in my mind. It was much more relaxed and you just listened and you didn't tell me to cut anything. You just said, all right, well, how do you, kind of how do you want to feel and what could we add? What could you add? Like, could you
Totally.
add maybe another serving of produce? How does that sound? And it was kind of like um you offered changes. You asked what was comfortable for me, what was reasonable for me based on my goals. Because that's really what it's about. Like what do you want to change and how do you want this to look later? And then that's how you sort of um crafted our sessions and your suggestions and things like that we talked about. And it was great. So it was like I started adding more healthy things and sort of naturally, which I think it's sort of like I think your master plan,
Mhm.
you're like as
There
you
is a
add,
master plan under there.
yeah, it's that you add more healthy things, some of the unhealthy things just sort of start to fall by the wayside naturally. And it was so much more of a learning experience and a growth experience for me. And yeah, so I wanted to share that because I do think there are a lot of people that have a misconception about what nutrition counseling is and what it means to talk to a dietitian.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that. And I think, as you were talking, I was almost thinking some of it's almost like an oxymoron because, we think about nutrition in the sense of how, we're just going to take everything away. We're going to lose weight and take it away. And like, talk about mood and mental health. Like already you feel sad and stressed and, troubled. Um, but you're right. There's this whole idea where it's like, even when you're thinking about food in a purposeful way and improving mood, yeah, you can think about what to add. It's just a whole different mind shift from like the diet culture, I think that typically is so pervasive. Um, we're always coming from this place of how am I going to punish myself to get what I want? And really, even like this conversation today is like the complete opposite. Um, we're not going to talk about what to take away. You could argue there are some foods that would be helpful, if we didn't have them as much, but it is like, what are we going to add to really get our bodies in the best place to support not only our physical health, but our mental health?
Yeah, and I think that's just a much more healthy approach and a
Yeah.
much more manageable approach because the at least in my experience, um, for probably over 20 years, I tried many different diets and didn't stay with any of them because it was all about cutting and removing and stuff, which is sort of even those words sort of have a negative energy about it. So after it's sort of, you get sort of mentally tired or bored, or so you quit, and because it doesn't. So when you're adding things, it's a totally different energy, because it's you want to, you're doing more, so it feels better.
Yeah, totally. And even when you look at, so as you know, as a wellness coach, I talk about motivational interviewing. We know that principles of behavior change tell us that you can only stick with things that feel restrictive for like a finite period of time. So
Mm.
if you are deciding, you're cutting out, we're going to say, no sugar, no alcohol, no processed food, no fun, eventually at some point, like you'll kind of revolt against that because that's just in our nature to kind of push back when when we're presented with change that we didn't maybe invite on our own or that we don't wholeheartedly want. Um, I think as an individual, you need to make the case for the change. It has to come from you. It's got to be important to you. And it has to come from a place where, yes, it's what am I adding into my world instead of what am I going to make myself feel deprived from?
Yeah, and that's a good word, deprive, because that's often how I would feel when I was removing all these things that this particular diet told me to remove. And
Yeah.
then you're always feeling like you're missing out on something.
Yes. And not eating enough and eating too few calories can make us cranky, anxious, depressed, and all those things too.
Yeah. So, I know there are ways people will use food as a coping mechanism, and which is, also called emotional eating. It's probably a lot of different, or stress eating. And can you talk about some of your experience with that, and how you help people sort of shift that pattern?
Yeah, I think I think one of the biggest things. So I know I told all those different things too. Like, is it emotional eating? Is it stress eating? People will be like, I'm not stressed. It's like, well, maybe you're not, but we're probably using food to handle so many different emotions. We use them to handle every emotion. When I was growing up, ice cream was a reward. We got Pizza Hut rewards for reading books. I'm aging myself. Everything was kind of like, this reward for food. And, I think we carry that with us into adulthood. And then we kind of don't really have the coping skills to handle stress. And food is, it's everywhere, right? We can get it in a minute. It's socially acceptable. It's relatively inexpensive. We can keep doing whatever we were doing, so it doesn't like have to stop our productivity. But emotional eating, I think, is anytime we're using food to handle emotions instead of using like a coping mechanism that directly meets whatever that need or that emotion is that we have. So that could be as simple as I had a bad day, I'm ordering takeout. Or I had an awesome day, I'm ordering takeout. So my takeout is like, nachos and, fries and whatever it is. Um, yeah, or it could be like I'm bored. I don't like the work I'm doing. I'm bored. I'm just keeping that hand, going to the M&Ms because it's like giving my brain that, blast of dopamine that I need because this other work is boring. So I think it can really be like anywhere along that continuum.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned how sometimes we go to food for coping because we don't actually know the healthy way to cope or move through that emotion or stress or whatever it is we're going through. And you're right, a lot of us did learn that as kids, and I went through the same thing. Like, if something bad happened, or I was sad, my mom would make me offer me some sweets, and like you
That's
said, it was the same thing with rewards. So whether it was helping me, trying to make me happy, or trying to reward me, either way it was food. And I think a lot of us did learn that. And you're right, I think it's recognizing that and saying, okay, I don't actually know the way to process my feelings. So, and I think, like you mentioned, oh, I had a bad day. I'm going to order takeout. And then what happens is that uh, likely is going to keep repeating because you're not learning it. You're not actually learning the way to process that bad day and what actually happened and what was really going on there. So I think it's easy for people to get stuck in those patterns, right?
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I had great parents growing up, but I don't think anybody was worried about teaching me, really like how to handle, tough feelings. I think it was kind of the era of like, you just kind of suck it up, you move on, kind of just get over it. Um, I didn't know ever that yoga was a thing or that deep breathing was a thing or that, such a thing like meditation existed. I just think there wasn't the focus on like how to handle stress, mental health wasn't a thing. And so it wasn't until I was probably in my like mid 20s that I realized that there were other ways to handle, stress situations that I could control. Um, and I like to highlight that because I think that just so many of us aren't like always given those coping skills by no fault of our parents, but I think it's just a reflection of culture and, maybe where we're growing up and kind of what's going on at the time. And then, you get to be an adult and we really don't know how to handle like a lot of uncomfortable feelings. And I think adulthood is kind of plagued by a lot of uncomfortable feelings. Um, yeah, and it can be really hard to know what to do. And food is just so easy because it's always there, and we've probably been socialized to bring that into the equation in some form.
Yeah. Um, so when you have clients who maybe this is one of their challenges is food as a coping mechanism for them. I'm just curious if some of these sessions kind of turn into sort of a more of an emotional coaching session because you're probably helping them recognize that that you're helping them become aware that they don't actually know how to deal with their feelings. And so I'm curious if that's something that happens and if you're you end up being like a life coach sometimes because
Yeah,
it
a
shifts
hundred
that way.
percent. A
Yeah.
hundred percent. I think some of my clients joke that I should be like hanging a sign outside that says like, food therapist or I will say some of that is just my personality. I'm very comfortable in that arena. I'm like kind of, a touchy feely, let's talk about all the feels kind of person. Um, but yeah, it does. It does turn into therapy because food is so much more than just food. So many of my clients, especially, ones who maybe struggle with whether it's a true eating disorder or just, somewhere along the lines of overeating, binge eating, whatever it might be, emotional eating. Um, yeah, we end up talking. We end up talking about, all of those things. And they know oftentimes what to eat. Sometimes people come to me for, true, knowledge, education, but so often people know exactly what to eat, but there is this whole emotional piece. And sometimes the first step is really working to identify that. And that could be as simple on my end as saying, hey, it sounds like you're saying that when you are stressed, you're snacking, instead of doing maybe something else that would meet that need that you have at the time.
Mm. Yeah, I bet that really helps people shift their mindset.
It does because I think oftentimes people don't even really know. We just kind of get so ingrained in our habits and what we do, and we might not even, realize it as such. But a lot of times, we tend to be like pretty introspective, right, as a species. And if somebody says something to you, you'll kind of, maybe even in the moment, if you don't think, if you're like, if you're sitting here right now listening to it and you're like, I don't think that's me, like maybe you'll ask yourself, like, is it me? When I'm snacking, like just thinking about, times a day where someone's more likely to snack. I can tell you it tends to be, it's like 3 p.m., sometimes after lunch, um, from 6 p.m. on. They're like kind of all these times. And I often feel like what they all have in common is that it tends to be when our defenses are down. Like we're tired, we're stressed, maybe we've already been going for like 8 hours that day. There's always that kind of that emotional component that's at play. Um, Not a lot of people are like emotional eating or binge eating like for breakfast. It always kind of is like as the day goes on, we come across more problems, we're more stressed, all the things. And by nighttime, we're like exhausted. Maybe you're bored, maybe, any of the things that could come up. And
Yeah.
yeah, and sometimes even just looking at some of those habits, you might be like, oh, yeah, that sounds like me. That sounds like me.
Yeah. And I hadn't even thought about the time until you just said that. And it makes so much sense that it
Yeah,
happens in the afternoon. Yeah.
it does. It does. Or after lunch. Eating like never happens in a bubble. We think it's its own thing, but it is just impacted by every single thing in our world.
Yeah. Which makes it so much harder to to try to do all the best things. Yeah.
Yeah. But there are so many things you can do, and I think even just like sometimes having that like that look inside yourself to say, hey, am I really hungry? Sometimes like that is the biggest thing that you can do. And hunger is kind of a relative term because wanting food doesn't mean you're physically hungry. They're
Mm,
two very separate things. So, we want food, like we might want food all the time, right? Because food is so good and it's delicious. And, it's like the way that we celebrate with our friends and connect with people. My love language is very much like, let me cook food for you,
hmm.
let me bake you heart shaped cookies, something like that. Um, and so food is all of those things for us. And so wanting food doesn't mean you're physically hungry for food. And sometimes I feel like that's that first distinction that has to take place.
Yeah, that's a good one. That I probably don't ask myself enough. And sometimes I'm out busy and then I look at the clock and I'm like, oh, it's 1. I should probably eat lunch. Just because it's 1 o'clock. That's a reasonable lunchtime. So,
Yeah, yeah. And I guess sometimes in our culture, we do because we have, the time work starts and then we have a lunch break and all
mhm.
these things. And so that can muddy the waters with really thinking about like, am I hungry? Is now a good time to eat? And so maybe during your workday or whatever kind of structure your day looks like, maybe you focus less on that. But there are plenty of other times where, if we're eating a meal, if it's dinner time, like we could very much say, hey, am I still hungry? We can kind of check in with ourselves and we can try to gauge like what our level of hunger is, what our feeling of fullness is. Um, and this is such a small thing. It's free to do. You don't need any equipment for it. And it can be one of the hardest things to tap into because our hunger cues, I think, get so disjointed from what's really going on inside our bodies.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, are there foods, and I guess this could vary depending on the individual, but generally speaking, um, are there some foods that you know of that are sort of mood boosters or just not even a mood booster, but maybe they're good at promoting emotional balance?
Yeah, definitely. We can actually talk about it in two ways. The first way, really, when I think about food and like you said, promoting like emotional balance, is we really want to keep everything in our body like nice and even. I always kind of picture our bodies as like kind of being like on this roller coaster, and it's like we're always trying to slow down the ride, you know.
Mm,
So we want like our blood sugar to stay nice and even. We're trying to keep our cortisol levels, pretty smooth. We're trying to keep our heart rate nice and stable. Like we're kind of trying to do all these things. And honestly, one of the best ways that you can do that is to eat regular meals so that your blood sugar is regulated. Um, if you go really large periods of time without eating, your blood sugar will take a dip. It makes you feel kind of lightheaded, kind of dizzy, starving. Say, you don't have a meal, but you've got, jelly beans on your desk, or you're grabbing a soda, or, there's cookies in a break room or wherever it is, and you're eating that. Now your blood sugar is spiking, going up real high, and then it's going to come crashing again. So your body is kind of like on this, roller coaster. But if you ate regular meals spaced, say, every like 3 to 4 hours, and you had some protein and you had some fat and you had some carbohydrates, now your digestion is going to be a little bit slower. So it's going to be like a steady stream of glucose going into your blood, and you're not going to have those spikes and it rises and falls, and it's going to keep everything more stable. Um, and that's just going to help fuel your body and keep you feeling better. It's going to prevent cravings and kind of all of those things. And that's going to help to keep your mood more evenly regulated.
yeah, I will say that I'm one of the people that gets hangry. So,
Mm-hmm. Hangry. That's what we are talking about. We are talking about hangry. That's exactly right.
yes, I get hangry.
Yeah,
And also I'll start to get a headache if I wait too long to eat.
totally.
And then it's really hard to recover from that.
Oh yeah, there's like
It's not like
recovery
I have a
bars.
meal and then suddenly I feel great.
Oh
It's
no,
not like that.
not at all. No. But then with that being said too, then there are like, the foods that we know now are good for our mood. Omega-3 fatty acids, that is probably like the biggest group of foods that we know has mood boosting properties. So your omega-3s are going to be any of your heart healthy fats, like salmon, we know is high in omega-3 fatty acids. Omega-3s lower inflammation in the body. Um, they help to kind of keep everything calm, definitely help to boost the mood. They can also help with your production of neurotransmitters, as can protein rich foods. So amino acids that found in proteins are the precursor to neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, all those feel good chemicals. So we want to add more of those to our diet. Like I said, it could be salmon or fish or literally anything that comes from the ocean. Even like a can of tuna will advertise that it's got omega-3 fatty acids in it. Then you have other things, maybe you don't like fish, don't even want to smell fish. It could be nuts, any nut. Walnuts have the highest amount of omega-3 fatty acids, but it could be, you know, pecans, almonds, cashews are my favorite, literally any nut under the sun. And then you've got all your seeds too. Chia seeds, flax seeds, hemp seeds, they all have awesome fatty acid profiles.
So for the omega-3s, is there a is there like a max? Like, can you have too much? Is there a minimum? Like, if you wanted to sort of start incorporating this every day, like,
Yes.
what would be a good amount to shoot for?
Yeah, so there are a couple of different ways that you can look at it. I mean, you could just say, hey, I'm going to try to include 2 or 3 of these into my diet. You can use supplements. I always tell people, just as a disclaimer, like for the public world, just let your doctor know if you're taking any supplements, because omega-3 fatty acids, they can act as blood thinners. You just want to make sure it's not going to interact with anything. but typically like 1 to 2 grams of an omega-3 supplement is helpful. But I just like the idea of saying like, hey, can we add some of these, with each of our meals? Could we add, I don't know, flaxseed or chia seed to yogurt or oatmeal? Could I have, nuts as a snack? Could I add some to a salad for crunch? Could I have tuna for lunch? Kind of some of those things. Because again, you're coming back to that place where you're using food to improve your body and you're doing it in a way where you're saying, hey, what can I add? Like, what can I bring into my diet and into my life to kind of make some of this happen?
Yeah, and I'm someone who doesn't really like fish, so I
Yeah,
like
fair.
the idea. The nuts and the seeds are great, but like the ways you just said are really easy ways to just add it into your day. Like throw a tablespoon into your yogurt or your smoothie.
It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be hard.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be hard. And you want to see what's going to work for you. If you do like some sort of something from the sea, my daughter loves them. The seaweed snacks, and they can be like
Oh, they're like
they're
crunchy, right? It's
yeah,
almost
they're
like
in
a
like little packs. Um, those are awesome. Those are a good way to add things in, even just like oils, salad dressings,
mm,
avocado, um, lots of different ways you can bring some of those in.
yeah. All right. I like that. I can do that.
Yep, totally.
Um, so how about and I'm just thinking about this because of we were talking about foods, but now I'm thinking about actually how we eat. And,
Yep.
I hear people mention mindful eating, and I'm pretty sure I'm not one that often does mindful eating, because I have 4 young kids and I don't have time to be
I
mindfully
got
eating.
yeah,
But,
yeah,
um, but I know that I'm sure that makes a difference. And so can you talk a little bit about that? And if that's something that you work with clients on, or maybe just some tips to what
yeah,
even is mindful eating and maybe what's a way to start incorporating it?
yeah. It's such a good question. So mindful eating, like in a nutshell, is literally just paying attention to your food, which mindful eating has become such a buzzword, right? And I think we get so numb to some of these words. So mindful eating, we're like, oh yeah, I'm trying to be mindful, or I'm like, yeah, I'm going to be mindful. But like, what does that really mean? You know? But mindful eating is like paying attention. It means you're looking at your food. This is like before you eat it. Like you're sitting down like to your food, and you're looking at your food. You are looking at the color, the texture, maybe you're smelling your food, you're taking note of the temperature, is it hot or cold, um, the moisture content, you're just looking at your food. And I think we just sort of tend to be in this state of like overload all the time between social media and email and the internet. Our brains go like 1,000 miles in every direction. And so it can feel really like, oh my God, I can't sit still. I can't look at my food. But that's really what mindful eating is. It's like tasting our food, enjoying our food, and then paying attention to our bodies and seeing like when are we full, when are we satisfied. Um, but that's really mindful eating in a nutshell. Things that we know also go along with that, like I said, are sitting down. If you're listening, I would just ask you, how many meals do you eat sitting down, like at a table when you're not doing work or responding to emails? Um, Maybe not that many, right? Sometimes I ask my clients and they'll say, "Oh, there aren't any," or they'll say maybe one. Because some people will eat breakfast on their way to work, they'll eat lunch while they're working or in a meeting, and then dinner could be like on the go again at night.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes a goal around mindful eating could be just to sit down and just try to focus on your food for one meal a day. For some people, 3 meals a day feels too intense to do that.
Yeah.
You can start anywhere that feels good to you and feels manageable to you.
Yeah, I think starting small is a good tip because for anything really, because when you're making a change, if you try to take on too much at once, you're likely going to quit. And so you
Definitely.
start small and then you can set yourself up for success. Because if you do that thing all week, then you're like, yeah, look at that. I was mindfully eating.
Yeah, and another absolutely. Absolutely. And another thing we know about behavior change is that like increasing your confidence around what you're doing is so much of it. So if we say, hey, Trish, you're gonna eat one meal, a week mindfully, and you're like, oh, I could eat 20 meals a week mindfully, and I'll say, fine, but I want you to eat that one. And then you come back and you tell me you did that one. Well, now we're going to talk about what a rock star you are for doing the one, as opposed to if you would have decided on the 20, you come back and your head's going to be hanging low and you're going to be like, I didn't do it. It's going to decrease your confidence moving forward. So we always want to like be on that confident, uptick. Um, yeah. And I think it's a great way to approach it.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned. I think that's a great point is to when you start small, um, it's easier for you to accomplish that thing. And then it's also important to celebrate it. And I will say that you
Yeah.
are really, really great about celebrating your clients, um, uh, accomplishments, success, change, whatever, because you were always like, you were like a cheerleader. It was great.
Okay. It's one of my favorite parts. It's one of my absolute favorite parts of my job. And, you know, people have asked me like how I came back to work so quickly after Rob passed away. And I said, because my clients are like, they're like amazing. Like work really is like therapeutic for me. And it's something I just love so much. And even like this, look like this, just this wonderful conversation we're having. Um, I literally am just blessed with like the best clients who are really more like friends. Um, yeah. And so I get to celebrate all the fun things and all the great things that they're doing on their journeys too. It's pretty awesome.
It is awesome. When you were talking about mindful eating, I was wondering you know, if people start practicing mindful eating, and let's say, um, maybe it's fast food that they got on the way to their next kid's sporting event, but they're like, well, this is my dinner this week, so I'm just going to mindfully eat this. And I'm wondering if someone started mindfully eating more frequently with those types of meals, if they might actually start to feel like, I don't really like eating this, and then might start to shift that way.
Yeah, I actually really love that you asked that question because as soon as you started saying it, I was like, yes, yes. Your mindful eating doesn't have to be with like, this really healthy meal that you prepared. It can be anything. Yes. If you were going through the drive-through, eating your McDonald's or Chick-fil-A or whatever it is, yeah, start mindful eating there. You can literally start, we eat all day long, right? So your journey from mindful eating can start at your very next meal. So you can do that right away. Yes, I'm so glad you brought that up. Yeah, don't wait until you feel like you have this beautiful, perfectly, Pinterest crafted salad. Like, just start with whatever it is that you're eating. Yeah, because it will, there's also this saying in wellness that what you practice grows. So
Mm.
what might start as this little seed, that you're planting for mindful eating, that seed will grow. The more you focus your attention on it, the more you kind of bring that, attention back to what you're doing. Yeah, it'll get stronger for sure. And you'll find it'll start to enter into other areas of your life too. Because what you're really saying is, hey, I'm going to be in the present moment. We're talking about doing it with food, but you're kind of saying, I'm going to be in the here and now.
Yeah. I love that because you're right. When you're mindfully eating, that means you are present. All you're doing, you're not thinking about where you were, where you need to go.
So
That 12 other things you need to do that night. All you're doing is putting your awareness on what you're doing in that moment.
Yeah,
So, yeah, that's huge.
100%. And I think what we all have at the very least is we all have a present moment, in the here and now. And so we can all do that, and your mindfulness, maybe it's a minute, maybe you set an alarm for a minute, maybe you just dabble with the idea, but it's only going to improve and grow from there.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. Well, look at the time. Who said that? Who said that? Who said that? Who, who, who said that? Who said that? Who said that? Who said that?
So in my last, I don't have it in this office, but in my last office on my wall, I had the quote from Gandhi, be the change you wish to see in the world. Um, I don't know how much it relates to nutrition, though I do practice what I preach, but I just, we're an extension of this beautiful world that we live in, and we need to be what we want our future to be. And so I try to bring that into many areas of my life. But I think it means that the change starts with us. We control our own destiny and where we go, and we want to be what we want from others and from the world around us.
Yeah, I love that. That's one of my favorite quotes too. And
Yeah,
I think it does relate to food because it relates to anything that you're doing because you can be a model for other people. And, especially if you have kids or, but anyone in your life, if you are the best way to really teach people or have an effect on people is to really model it. So instead of saying you should eat more vegetables or you shouldn't eat so much candy or I'm saying just eat, do your mindful eating and you eat lots of produce and then you'll start feeling better. People around you will notice that. And it's sort of like can be contagious in a way.
yeah. And I do. I have my son is 10, and my daughter is gonna be 13. So she is just right in that age group. She's just very susceptible to everything coming across. Social media and culture and, you know, everything. And on, Instagram, I think as much as you say, oh, we're not going to let them have it, we're not going to let them go on, right? They're having access to everything in various ways. If they're with a friend and they're looking at things, you can't kind of keep it all away from everybody. And so, I want nothing more than for her to have a healthy relationship with food and a healthy relationship with her body, and the messaging is like it's tough for everybody out there, but it's tough for females for sure. So I really try hard. Even though I'm a dietitian, you might see it on my plate, but you might not hear it in my, you know, in my messaging to my family, because I just want them to be at peace with food, know what the benefits are, for their body and for their brain. Um, but I don't want that negative piece to come across, that it's a tool for weight loss or anything like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point because it's kind of, I mean, I grew up with it being, it, it was a thing, and it was, I mean, we didn't have social media when I was a kid, but it was all the
The
magazine covers
magazines, all the
were
magazines,
like perfectly, shaped female bodies and that was everywhere. That's all you saw. So as kids, we're like, oh, I guess that's how we're supposed to, like, that's the ideal. That's
right?
kind of what was not said, but sort of implied. That's the
Yeah,
ideal. So I think that's a good point, especially about even body image. And that goes along with food. Um, so yeah, I'm
yeah,
glad you mentioned that.
yeah. And I actually think, the discussion about mental health, the discussion about body image, because they're actually very intertwined. The one piece that's not present in any of those is this idea of nourishing the body, eating mindfully. That's almost like the antithesis. That way of looking at food says, ooh, you better don't eat too much. You better stop before you even think about being full, but kind of this other way of approaching it, this other way of eating that we're talking about really is coming from this place of abundance where, we're really fueling our body and like giving our body everything it needs to be its healthiest. We're giving our brain enough glucose to be healthy. You need 130 grams of glucose per day just for optimal brain function. So I don't want that point to get lost because you can't feel your best and your mood can't be your best if your brain is starved of glucose. And diet culture tells us to starve our brain, of glucose, not in those words, but just in the recommendations. So I just think, we really need to approach it from this place of how are we going to care for ourselves by giving our bodies what it really needs, what they really need.
Yeah. And I think it's, if it goes back to mindful eating, I think, or just really paying attention to how we feel, being aware of how we feel. And I think that's an important part for kids to learn that I didn't learn. It was, I didn't learn anything really helpful about
No,
food.
I think probably
so,
nothing, right?
so, but just
Probably
really being
nothing.
aware, how do I feel? Like, how do I feel when I eat, you know, um, a candy bar? How do I feel after? And then how do I feel after I eat like some fruit and veggies? So just noticing that and feeling like, oh, well, this feels better. Like it
Definitely.
doesn't matter what anyone says is right or wrong or good or bad. This feels better. So let's do more of that.
Definitely. Because even though we're saying, hey, we're not like focusing on what we're taking away, we do know that foods that are high in sugar, that are heavily processed, we do know that they can be associated with higher levels of anxiety, lower feelings of well being, things like that. But I think sometimes I feel like we never are taught to tap into ourselves like that we might figure that out if we were kind of thought to think about how we feel, like really feel after we eat. But we kind of don't, we're sort of just taught to like, eat all the things, kind of get this brain, get the dopamine rush, and then kind of move on. So we're never really taught um, that relationship between, eating a bag of Skittles and kind of having this crash later on. Um, so the mindful eating can actually, I think, be helpful in that regard too. Because if we really thought about how our body and brain felt after, we might realize that eating these more well balanced meals made us feel better too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think also how we talk about it matters too, because, I grew up, like I said, from the time I was really young, like doing diets with my older sisters. And
Right.
I think even the language we use, because it was like how many times have you heard someone say, um, oh, I'm gonna have a cheat day, or oh, I cheated, I cheated yesterday, or I cheated, and it's like this negative, like, oh, I was bad. And then there's this shame that comes with it.
Yep.
And like those are the kind of things that we learn. And I still hear that stuff today when I hear about different eating plans and stuff, and people talk about their cheat day. And I always sort of cringe when I hear it because I'm like, can we say something else? I don't know, like, because I think that and it's just kind of how you talked about adding things instead of removing things. Like, hey, today I'm gonna instead of saying a cheat day, like, because maybe you're like going to a party or hanging out with friends, you're just like, you know what, today my focus is going to be on connecting with my friends
Totally.
instead of saying today's my cheat day, I'll eat whatever I want. Like, just today my focus is on my friends and connecting with them instead of it being on what I'm eating or not eating. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you really hit it spot on when you said there's this shame that surrounds us wanting to have sweet food, salty food, junk food, like whatever you want to call it. Yeah, it's like we feel like we have to like be like, oh well, I'm doing this today, almost to like confess,
Mhm.
the shame that we have surrounding it. And there shouldn't be shame. I think as humans, we're meant like our brains are meant to want all the things, right? They're meant to want cookies and cakes and sweets and snacks. And I don't know if there's anything wrong with that. Actually, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's just the way we're wired. And I also don't agree that food should only be fuel. And I know I could get some kickback for that, but I think that food should have a place, like in a perfect world, of being fun, being a way of connecting, being a way that we show people that we care about each other. And I think if we did that in a way where we weren't blaming ourselves, weren't putting ourselves down, but instead we're just like, you know what? I had this awesome ice cream sundae. This is me now talking. I went to Friendly's on Sunday and I had this amazing ice cream sundae. And you know what? I enjoyed every last bit of it. And I like scraped the bottom of the, I scraped every last little bit of caramel out of the bottom because it was so good. And I feel fabulous about that. So I think that's like where we need to be with some of it. And I think we need to shift. We're allowed to enjoy food. It is okay.
Yeah, I think, and I'm so glad you mentioned how you don't say that food is fuel, because that actually went through my mind a little early in the conversation. Because I've heard people say, oh, food is just fuel. But I think when it's more of an experience, when I think in a lot of cases it is, that's where you can really change things, because what kind of experience do you want to have? And when you look at so many other cultures, food is such a big part of their culture, and certain foods for celebrating certain things, and certain foods have certain meanings, and there's so much more to it. And it is an experience, it's not just fuel.
I think if we come full circle, right, and I don't even think the problem is enjoying these foods, and food doesn't have to be just fuel. I think the area, and this kind of is where we began, is that I think we tend to feel bad when we use food to solely manage emotions that we weren't even aware of or working on, because I think afterwards we were kind of like, that didn't really fix what I wanted it to fix. And now I kind of feel junky. But that's not a shameful experience. That's like the opportunity for like a learning,
Mm,
experience for us to be like, let me tap in and learn more about myself and what my feelings are and maybe what some of these tools are that I can use, to manage my emotions without using food. I think that might be almost coming back around to where we started. To me, that almost feels like more of, where we want that focus to be.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that. So I don't want to keep it too long, but I do want to ask you if anyone's interested, because I know you do virtual sessions. So are you able to work with people in other states? There's no licensing issues or anything like that?
Yeah, so I'm able to work with people in states.
Okay.
Every now and then, some of the states have licensing,
Okay.
uh, requirements, but I'll always check it out for you. Insurance is fine with it. I accept insurance. And yes, I would be thrilled to work with each and every one of you who might be listening or watching this. Yeah, who wants to chit chat and see how maybe we can incorporate some of this for you. Yeah, thank you for that, Trish.
Yeah. Well, and what's the best way for people to find you?
I am so you can easily send me an email. So my email address is Beth at nutritionalliving.org. My website is nutritionalliving.org. You can Google me, Beth Chiodo, registered dietitian. You will find me. I am all over the internet. And then you can make your way. You can make your way to me. But I think any of those would be great.
All right. I'll put
I
all of
would
this
love
in
to
the
bet.
show notes so people can find you.
Awesome. Thank
Yeah,
you.
and I could probably continue this for at least another hour.
At least.
And this was a really, really great conversation. And I have to thank you again for making the time to chat with me.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. It means a lot.
It was really fun. And if you're up to it, I might bring you back one day.
That sounds fabulous.
Because
I would love a round two.
I think there's so much more to talk about. So,
I would love
but thank you. I think this was a good intro for everyone.
You're welcome. Thank you so much, Trish. And yeah, I will look forward to coming on at any other time.
All right. And for everyone listening, you are enough, just as you are, and you are loved. Make a great day.